the Pinafore dress, a gorgeous little dress which can be made in a lightweight or a heavier fabric. I've used cotton and a corduroy, and they just look absolutely gorgeous. And they have a button fastening on the shoulder. Pattern pieces required is a front panel, one on the fold, and a back panel, one on the fold, plus a front facing on the fold and a back facing on the fold. Cutting out your pinafore. The front and the back are very much the same, so pin them on the fold of your fabric on the straight grain and cut around them very carefully once you've pinned them, and make sure you do those lovely shaped curves when you're cutting, and that you put your markings in to show the front and the back armholes. And you also need to cut out facings. Facings are the top portion of the pinafore, so pin it out, cut around it carefully, and you'll need to do the same for the back facing and the back pinafore panel. And you'll also need to cut out interfacing for the facings, and you'll need to do one for the front and for the back, so it's the same as with the fabric. Lay it on the fold of the interfacing, pin it down and cut up to the edges around the pattern piece. Right, so the first thing we do is iron on our interfacing to our facings front and back. Make sure you've got the shiny side down and press them to make sure they adhere, and do it for both. Right, so the first thing we need to do is neaten the edges of the facing, so that's the lower half, the curved one, the one without the shoulders to it, and we do that with zigzag stitch, 3mm long, 3mm wide, so we do that on the front and the back, and trim our threads. And then we're going to place the facings onto the adjacent panel, so the front facing onto the front pinafore panel, right sides facing, pin in place, and we're going to do a 1 cm seam, straight stitch, going slowly around all the curves, and when we get to the corner of the front facing where the button is, we pivot, which means we leave our needle in, and we turn our garment and put our foot back down and carry on. Slowly go around the front because it's quite a tight curve. Take your time. And here we've got a close-up of the pinafore pivot. And you can actually have smaller stitches towards these corners if you want, so you're dropping the length of the stitch, and carry on around the side seam. And then we're going to cut those corners off, trim a little bit of our seam allowance, and we're also going to clip that seam to release the tension so that when we turn it inside out it presses well and doesn't have any puckers in it. So try not to cut through the sewing lines. Every 1 to 2 centimetres for a less curved area, and 1 to 2 centimetres on a tight curved area, and then we grade it to reduce the bulk of the seam. Do the same along the armholes, and then we turn it inside out. Use our turning tool, our metal ruler or a dull ended tool to get those lovely points out, and then we're going to press it, and do the same for the back. So you're going to pin the back facing to the back, sew it, cut the corners, clip it and press it. Okay, we're sewing the side seams now. We're pinning the back to the front, and your first pin should go at the facing seam. So you pin it at that facing seam, at the top of the facing and at the lower hem, and pin in between. And then we're going to sew it with straight stitch, and be careful when you're going over that bulky facing seam as there's 4 layers of fabric there. Back stitch to finish your seam, and then we need to overlock the seam with zigzag to neaten it, and make sure we're trimming our threads, leaving a good professional looking job. Okay, and we're going to press this seam, and you can fold over the facing at that point as well to press it down. You might like to trim it a little bit on the seam allowance to make it sit down nicely. Do it on both sides. And then what we're going to do is, where we've pressed that armhole and neck edge, we top stitch it. So with a single straight stitch all the way around, holds it down, and where the side seam is, you can actually tack a few stitches at the bottom of the facing on the right side just to hold that down so it doesn't flick up. And remember to pivot on those corners. I quite like the funky look of these squared off shoulders. The hem. We need to neaten the lower edges of our pinafore and fold to the wrong side with a 1.5 cm hem, pin and top stitch on the right side with the straight stitch. But if you're doing a twin needle, all you have to do is fold over your hem to the wrong side and pin, and use the twin needle to do your top stitching with, and at the same time it will neaten the other side with zigzag stitch. And when you've finished the seam, press your hem from the wrong side all the way round, and we're just about finished. We just have the buttons to go. Okay, we're on to the fastenings. You can use a tailor's chalk to mark where your button's going to go, or you can put your button down and put a pin at the top and the bottom of the button and one in the centre. So your buttonhole as per your sewing machine instructions. Have a look at the sewing module for the shirt, for the written instructions. Open your buttonhole with your seam ripper about 2/3 of the way, and check that your button will go through the hole. If it's still too tight, open it a bit more. If it's too loose, sew it up with zigzag. Then we're going to find out where we're going to place our button. So we lay our back shoulder strap over our front one and put a pin through the centre of the buttonhole to find out where that button's going to go. And we use a double thread and a hand needle. I usually leave the knot at the front. It gets hidden by the button. And I like to go through the button holes 3 loops at least, which means there'll be 6 threads going through each hole to hold it down. And tie your button off at the back with a knot, and then pierce through the facing, between the facing and the front of the dress, and leave your threads in there. Cut them so they're about 1 or 2 centimetres long, and it hides them.